Welcome to the Move Daily Health Podcast. I'm Dane Wallace, here with Freya Spence, and today we welcome back a longtime friend of the podcast, Professor Stu Phillips. Stu is a professor in the Department of Kinesiology and is a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Skeletal Muscle Health. He is director of the Physical Activity Center of Excellence, otherwise known as PACE, and the McMaster Center for Nutrition, Exercise, and Health Research. He is also the lab lead for the MAC Exercise Metabolism Research Group. Stu's research is primarily focused on the impact of nutrition and exercise on human skeletal muscle, and he has more than 31,000 career citations and over 400 original scientific research and review papers. Now, Stu joined us about 5 years ago for a chat to cover protein, but today we're going to dive into some of his latest research and cover topics such as hypertrophy, the female reproductive cycle, aging and longevity, and much more. So without further ado, Stu, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's absolutely our pleasure.
Is it really 5 years ago?
Crazy. So pandemic times have just we went to a time warp when we lost 2-3 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's good to see you guys.
Yeah.
Great to see you too.
Fantastic. Are you in Canada proper right now? I know you do a lot of travel.
I am. Yeah. No, I'm in my office in Hamilton. Yeah.
There you go.
Easy. Enjoying the lovely weather that we're finally getting.
Exactly. Spring-ish weather.
Spring-ish, exactly. Spring-ish weather is my favorite time of the year, so here we go. So anyways, as I just mentioned, when you and I first crossed paths, which I think was about a decade ago, if we want to go that far back, the topic was protein. Since then, the scope of your research seems to have broadened quite a bit. So to kick off our conversation today, can you give us a bit of insight into what areas you're seeing the most growth in research today?
Yeah, I think everything we do now, or not everything, but a lot of what we do now is geared more towards aging. I think that's a function of taking over the directorship of PACE. The average age of the members is about 73. And they've just refocused my lens on, and I'm getting older, right? So on what it means to be stronger, more mobile, everything as you age. And I think there's a little bit of I won't call it longevity. I prefer health span as opposed to lifespan, and sort of refocusing of what it takes to live better. And that's been a big part of what we've been doing for the last little while. So.
Yeah, I think to your point about us aging is like our perspective starts to shift and then our interests start to shift, and especially when it concerns health span, we start asking questions like, okay, well, what is possible at this age group, and what were our beliefs before about this decade of life, and what can they be like? What's the potential? Because there is so much potential, but when we're busy being 20-year-olds, we're not necessarily as attuned to that.
Yeah. And when you're 20, you're bulletproof, right? Of course.
Of course. All the way up until 28, and then like a pin drops and everything changes.
I don't know what I'm going to use. I had the opportunity to meet Hal and Joanne of Body Break. Hal and Joanne. We all know Hal and Joanne. Yes. And Hal Johnson the guy's amazing. Like he's in really great shape. He's defying aging, definitely. And he said to me, it's about creating a vision of your future you. And I don't know when you begin to do that, but at some point you just look down the road and think, what am I going to be like when I'm older? Like, I know I'm going to age, but do I want to be active? What do I want to do? And he just said that, here's a picture of my dad. Look, he's golfing and he's 87. So he goes, that's what I want to be able to do.
Yeah, my dad's still faster than me on the bike, even if he's less trained. And so I'm like, one day I might
good
be able to keep up.
Good genes.
Yeah, it's great. Which on that note, we were looking at one of your papers on sarcopenia. And we've seen that come out more and more often just in like mainstream news. And of course the definition around it has evolved. It used to be just seen as something that was associated like the term was seen as something that was purely associated with like muscle mass loss, which is of course a challenging thing to define. And interestingly, we saw from your paper that now one of the most recent definitions didn't include a metric of muscle mass, but instead highlighted a lot of functional capacities like gait speed and strength, and a lot of like grip strength, and a lot of the other sort of parameters that we've attributed to, better health spans. So do you have any sort of like insight in terms of your opinions on how that's evolving and how our understanding of it is being defined, even just clinically relative to before?
Well, first, let me say I'm encouraged that people understand what sarcopenia is. 10 years ago, you'd find a few people, maybe some clinicians, but now it's becoming more of a mainstream word, which is great. I do think that the biological substrate that underpins all of this is it's still muscle. The truth is we don't have a very good way of quantifying muscle. And because of that, we've used some proxies of muscle, usually a DEXA scan or something like that, which isn't a particularly good way of measuring muscle. And when we do that, we've come up with a lack of association. So as you said, the more recent definitions focused on what we can measure. So we can measure strength. We can measure functional tasks like an up and go, a chair stand task, something like that, which all tend to try and capture aspects of daily life. And I think those are still very good metrics, but I do know that when we can measure muscle, it does actually predict some of these outcomes as well. So I still think it's a muscle centric condition, but it's the same old mantra, use it or lose it, and all of the incumbent benefits that go along with that with respect to mobility.
Yeah, and so when you say there's not a direct correlation, like in terms of measuring muscle mass, is that to say that somebody, let's say two people who are about the same age, could have the same amount of muscle mass, but the amount of strength and functionality within that could be very different from one person to the next? Is that about what you're trying to say?
Yeah, for the most part, I think it's still a mass argument. So it's a little bit like the same analogy that if you told a woman you've got to accrue your peak bone mass before age 30, and then you're going into menopause, and if you're at a higher bone mineral density, everybody's going to go down. So start as high as you can. So it's still a muscle mass issue, but to your point, Dane, like I do think you can have muscle mass that if you don't use it, it's just not particularly functional. So it's still be as physically active as you can. The big message we've been trying to push lately is just, there's another part of the physical activity guidelines. It's not just going for a walk, which is great exercise. Don't get me wrong, but being strong. So doing something to maintain your muscle mass, to maintain your strength, to maintain your power, because a lot of daily activities rely on those things.
Yeah, coming back to your point of, that future self that you want to create, and like think about what are the things you want to be doing. And, I just turned 40 last year, and obviously a lot of my friends are turning 40, and we have conversations about, certain things do get harder as you get older, even at the age of 40. And so it's thinking that's kind of like a good guide for people to use, is like, have you noticed anything getting more difficult even now? Because if you've noticed that, think about what will happen in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So what are the things you can start doing now that are going to equip you to do all of those things for as long as possible? So taking it right back to Hal and what he preached.
Yeah, I think that there's probably a list of things that people, even walking around a city, and people say, "Oh, I want to travel," and I'm like, "Well, forget about the North American ideal. Go to Paris if you happen to have the means, and try getting around on public transit, figuring that out. But you're walking everywhere, so can you handle 16, 17,000 steps? And walking up and down stairs, and doing all these sorts of things. I mean, that's what it means to travel in places beyond North America, for example. So getting in and out of cars, like things that are, you think, oh, I'm not going to have a struggle with that, but I watch a lot of people have a hard time. So, these are all things that you can prepare yourself for with a little bit more physical activity. So, and I'll just say 40's in the rear view mirror for me in a big way. So let's put it that way. I think that after emptying 2 bags of mulch on the weekend, recovery is also something that begins to go downhill.
Yeah, that's actually one of the biggest things that we've noticed, even just with our clients, and then of course with our own bodies, is the dose that you need changes, and then how quickly you can recover from said dose also changes. And I think slowly some of the apps have also cottoned on to the fact that there are people who won't recover as quickly and be able to follow these like 5 day a week sort of plans. And so they have master's plans now. Which just means that you train less frequently, so that you can still keep up, some of the intensity and get into that vigorous mode. Although gardening, it's sneaking up on people now, because I think it's one of those things you can go and do, and just you happen to wind up spending 5 hours doing it, and then it's a significant dose. And we find around now here with our clients here in Canada, it's like, oh, we're going to start having to remind people to change your position up, change your gardening task, don't spend 5 hours bent over weeding, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I mean, it's all about like this future you, whatever that is, and about trying to define what it is that you want to do. But I mean, one of the things that I've also come to realize, and we've written a few papers on this, is people call it various words. And so it was a late colleague of mine, Doug Patton Jones, he called it the catabolic crisis. And so as you get a little bit older, you have these, it could be a bad flu. You spend some time in hospital. You have a joint replacement. You spend some time in hospital. These disused periods are watershed moments for older people. And the recovery from those things is, I think, directly attributable, like a robust recovery, and go back to what you were doing before, a function of muscle, a function of strength, a function of the shape that you were in, because that's a huge trauma. And I think most older people will tell you that recovery from those things, in analogous to recovering from 5 hours of gardening that you weren't ready to do, or a really heavy workout, it takes longer, and it takes something out of you that if you don't have the reserve, and to me that's what muscle is, it's functional reserve, um, you're going to struggle.
So with that in mind, and speaking about healthy aging, I mean, obviously you've already spoken, like resistance training is hugely important. But are there any other really important things that people can do to make sure they are healthy and strong as they age? Like if you could give them one or two things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be remiss of me not to talk about being cardiorespiratorily fit. My colleague down the hall, Marty Gabala, would remind me is that still cardiorespiratory fitness is one of the more robust predictors of good health and the ability to withstand all of these, rigors of aging, if you like. So that's a de facto. I'll agree with that. The strength side of things, I think, comes down to a few things. So a lot of people talk about grip strength,
Hmm.
and I think it's probably important to let everybody know that that's just a proxy for, I'll call it global strength, that's easy to measure. So that's why we have, lots of data on grip strength.
Hmm.
But lower body strength and lower body power, knowing that 60% of your muscle mass is basically below your belt, is a key and critical part of aging well. Not to say that upper body strength isn't important, but getting across intersections, getting in and out of chairs, getting up and down stairs, in and out of cars, those sorts of things. At some point, those are going to be the activities that limit you, and so you had better practice something to keep yourself strong in that area, and a little bit of power too, so the ability to move quickly, and that's not often taught in a lot of places. Like it's all gentle stuff. and a lot of sort of arm curls, which are always great. You know, everybody likes doing arm curl. But it's tougher to convince people. You gotta squat. You gotta bend over. You gotta pick stuff up. So you gotta deadlift. Um, Getting up off of the floor if you fall, and you ask some people to do it, and they go, "I could do that," and I'm like, Can you show me?" And then once you lay them down, the struggle they have to get off the floor, I'm like, That's a big deal because you don't want to fall down and, as the phrase goes, not be able to get up because then you're a tough spot.
Yeah, and it's interesting because within a lot of the papers around fall prevention and then some of the programs that exist for fall prevention, he noted two things. One is a bit of my own sort of beef is that they don't go below chair height. And to me, I'm like, a fall happens below chair height. Like, a fall takes
Yeah.
you to the ground. It's very rare that you catch yourself above that if you're having, a fall event. And so the training needs to happen down there too. Like, you need to get into full flexion at your hips and knees. Like, you need to be able to push yourself off your arms. As you noted, you don't need that much upper body strength, but you need enough to sort of like pull your legs underneath you and prop yourself up on your arm. And we often see deficits in shoulder mobility are more like commonly an issue for functional strength, like lifting things overhead and so on. But with fall prevention, they do two things. One is not go below chair height, which is not the approach that we take. We want to make friends with the ground so that you don't have a fall. You're getting down there on purpose. But then the second one is power. You noted power, and that's actually another thing that we noticed a trend in was just that people were afraid if somebody had, osteoporosis or they, were generally more deconditioned and over, say, 50, a lot of people were afraid to try to train them towards developing any sort of power ability to handle momentum. And if we want to prevent a fall, we need to know how to have the reflexes and have the physical capacity to handle that. To me, that's power. And so I think, too, that changes. It's all about whether our perspective towards older age groups is one of potential versus one of fragility. And if we can see that there's still that potential, then we understand why we need to train things like power deliberately and why we need to challenge our level changes like that to be able to get down and back up, because it's also, if they don't have the confidence to get down and back up, they're at a higher risk of falling because their biomechanics are altered just on account of fear. And in Canada, where there's ice and snow and slush and things like that, it's even more pertinent to train those qualities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think your point about below chair height, very well taken. Most people, my mom, she's like, "Oh, I could get up. I would just pull on this." And I'm like, imagine that's not there, and you're just on the floor. Um, then it's a much more difficult proposition, as you say. You know, I can grab onto this, I can do this, I can, have my cane, and I'm like, no, you don't have any of that. So great point. The power thing, and I mean, it's interesting when you talk to people about a trip or a slip, your ability to correct from those things. If you pull one of these, amazing maneuvers, which you see in a Canadian winter, people slip, and then all of a sudden, limbs go in a different direction, and they're like, "Okay, I'm okay." Well, you did that fast. you know, you moved quickly to correct yourself. I mean, that's the definition of power, right? And it doesn't have to be that you need, a massive load, but you have to at least be able to move quickly within your own body weight. So, to your point, do we just, sort of bubble wrap everybody and say, let's just move slowly and a lot. And there are people who that's probably all that they can stand. I get it, very frail older people. But I do think if you've got the means and with appropriate skills and everything, you can guide people to move in that way and do them a real favor. I mean, slips, trips, and falls are basically balance, strength, and power. and not to be afraid. I'll say this because my occupational therapy friends are probably listening, is to do an audit of a home or whatever it is and take all the slip and trip hazards out. No question. But I mean, once you've got that and you're out on that little patch of ice, that ability to, that slide and just to move, that's a power maneuver for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I've experienced that myself.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I know we spoke to sarcopenia, and that's recognized as a disease state. What are your thoughts on this conversation of aging as a disease? I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think 20 years ago, we talked about sort of 6 theories of aging. Uh, 10 years ago, it was up to about 9. Now, the latest, I think you've probably got about 12 different processes that appear to be core to the aging process, or I would say core, they're contributing. I mean, the answer is that all of them, to some degree, play a role in why our cells don't behave as well as they used to, why we're not able to repair, why we're not able to do these things. And then, I mean, I think generically speaking, I'm really interested in reading about theories of aging and aging as a disease per se, and trying to mitigate declines in one or another of these processes. I'm a fan of trying to do that. I think the hard part is you put a lot of money then, or a lot of faith in one particular mechanism being not just but the reason why we age. And this is why exercise is so awesome. And I'm preaching to the converted, clearly. Is that it? Yeah, which is great, right? Is it targets, like, if it's not all 12, let's just say it's 6 or 7 or 8 out of the 12, right? Um, Nothing, to be very clear, despite what very high profile Harvard researchers might tell you, that we can do, reverses aging. And that includes any, little microdosing with drugs, or lots of other, I call them things that nibble around the edge, but big broad stroke things, uh, physical activity, exercise, a good diet, and that's a really tough one to unpack. But I think protein's in there, if you'll forgive me. Um, but then, things like having a good group and circle of friends and social circle in the traditional sense, not Facebook social, or friends you get together with, having purpose in life, lots of different things that when you look at something like these blue zones uh, appear to pull all these things together, and those people, they don't go to a gym, but they live on a like a cliffside like this in a beautiful place, which is hard to mimic. um, and they walk everywhere, but they also exist in a society where people, ageism is a non-thing. Like, they're valued, they're taken care of, people respect them. And I think that, so I love talking about mitochondrial theories of aging. I love talking about telomere shortening. I love talking about lack of proteostasis. And you can individually kind of drug these things, or try and mitigate them, or create a mouse model and push back against them, or caloric restriction for your entire life, which is like super cool and interesting, but hardly how most humans operate. um, but yeah, oh yeah, it's crazy, right? But then now GLP-1 drugs are going to solve everything, right? So I mean, exercise and a lot of these other things. I think you roll them all up into a ball. You've hit a lot of those things. So.
Mhm.
Yeah, I took an epigenetics course a few years back,
Mm.
just an updated one, which was super interesting because, of course, we
just for kicks,
because we did our undergrad so long ago that it, I was doing this and then going into a master's. And one of the interesting things to me is like every model that was presented ended with, and then they tried to use this drug because we found this thing about the leptin melanocortin pathway. They tried this drug. It worked for 4 weeks. And then it created these untenable side effects. And at every single section, like it was as if we were following, the discovery. But then the other branch to it was, but lifestyle and exercise helps it in ways that we don't fully understand. So it was like we can keep trying to drug in isolation, but because we're still in a very much, and I think this is where sometimes where very high profile people speak in absolutes about the way a thing goes, as if it's like a computer that's being rebooted to reverse aging. I think one of the biggest faults with that is that people don't understand, because they're not being told this, that this is all, like we're still discovering a lot of things. Like aging is such a complex thing that happens in our species and others. We don't necessarily even understand it in other species either, which is super interesting. We know that like chimps in captivity age differently than chimps in the wild, and you can understand that, there are all these different stressors on that organism, on that chimp in particular, or the entire group of them. And the same is true with us humans, like the blue zones. I think a lot of the stuff, there's like a mythical quality to it sometimes when people speak about it, but really when you dial it down, they live in these places that encourage movement all the time. Like we went to an island in Greece that's not a blue zone, but it's close to, it's close to mimicking that kind of environment. And you have no choice but to be strong to get around between the cobbled streets and the fact that everything goes up this way, like everything from the water all the way up, like you have no choice. And so sometimes it's the most obvious things and it's the simplest thing that gets overlooked in favor of the shiny, like this one little molecule, if we supplement, might do the thing that it maybe did in mice. And that's the nuance doesn't get communicated, which is challenging.
Yeah, nuance is, that's what aging is, and the ad infinitum details that I think are glossed over when people say, like I'm taking metformin or I'm taking rapamycin or something like this and microdosing, and because it's this protein, and I'm like to think that it could be one thing or one protein, and because it works in short-lived mammals that are in an inbred short-bred mammal, like these mouse strains are, or fruit flies or anything like that, and we're an outbred, non-caged, very highly multiply stressed organism. It's hard to translate. Let's put it that way. So again, broad strokes in these blue zones, and as you say, lots of other areas in all over the world where people live very different lifestyles, but they're very active, and they tend to have lots of habits that co-cluster, but at the same time, they do things very differently. A lot of people point out Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California. They have religious faith as a big part of who they are. They don't drink, they don't smoke. So, strike, and I'm like, or two strikes that you don't want, that I think we can all agree probably good things. But yet in Sardinia, another blue zone, they drink a lot with their friends. Nobody ever drinks to get absolutely smashed, but they have a couple of social glasses of wine just about every day.
Yeah, there's variability, right?
Yeah. Nuance is hard, though.
And people don't want nuance,
No.
right? They want absolute answers that are easy, and I wish it happened that way.
Yeah, and I think it's the way our brains kind of just operate, right? It's like, I have a problem, where's the solution? Like, it's a one thing, this is a silo, just give me the thing, and then I can fix this. And on that note, one of the things you mentioned kind of segues us nicely into something I wanted to ask you about, and that's regarding like weight loss. So
Mm.
rapid weight loss, basically to achieve that, you have to be in a very low calorie diet. That's kind of, you want to lose a lot of weight rapidly. That happens. And now there are drugs out there that are, helping people lose weight very rapidly, which, a lot of people would say that's a really good thing, especially for people who are really overweight. But with rapid weight loss, you're not just losing body fat. So do you have a take on these drugs and rapid weight loss in itself, and how important it probably is for these types of populations to also be doing some sort of resistance training, or at least including protein in their diet?
Yeah. So my opening comment is it's an exciting time. These drugs have opened the door to weight loss for people who have struggled with that process for a long, long time. Um, I do think we're now beginning to get data just like we did with long term diets and diet induced weight loss. That when you're on the drug, it's great. When you're off the drug, the weight comes back. And most people want to get off the drug at some point because they hit a plateau. But for some people, that can be after losing a lot of weight. Um, Everything, and I mean everything we know about weight loss. So go all the way back to these protein modified fasts, ridiculously low levels of energy intake, patient control trials, or excuse me, ward control trials. And it's usually 25 to 20 to 25% of body weight that's lost is what we call lean tissue, some of which has to be muscle. How much we're not entirely certain, but let's say it's at least 50 to 60%. Um, that's great if you lost enough weight that your mobility improved because you lost all of that weight. And a lot of patients who are overweight do experience that. I just worry about when you now regain the weight, if you get off the drug, that muscle loss that you had later in life is not a good thing. And so that's a question that the Lillies and the Novo Nordisk they know it's an important question. They're trying to figure the answer to that out. So I think the other one that's out there to be grappled with as a component of, I'll call it fat-free mass, is bone. And a lot of those very low calorie diets that people were on, this was decades and decades ago, but your bone mass goes down. Particularly if you choose to lose the weight, I'll call it passively, to your point around adding exercise.
Yeah.
So you just take the drug, you're not particularly active, but you experience the drug's effects in terms of appetite goes down and you're able to withstand eating less. And people are very happy. You lose weight and everything else like that. But the thing that you should be doing, and in our hands, we refer to it as high quality weight loss. So the weight that's lost with the highest possible ratio of fat to lean. And I mean, we want to lose stored body fat. We don't really want to lose muscle if we can, or bone, particularly. So, what's the answer? Well, resistance exercise, um, high quality protein, probably, and adequate calcium and vitamin D. We are now getting some trials that come out to show, first of all, that you have greater preservation of lean on those drugs when you do that. I don't think anybody's quite done the resistance exercise just right, but a lot, let's just say treadmill work, but because, that's the easiest thing to do.
Control.
Yeah, I pedal on a bike, go for a walk, treadmill. I'm like, weightlifting. but there are some people that get it, but we don't have the trial data yet, and so I'm hoping that we will soon. But at the same time, if you talk about people who get off the drug, and we look at the rate of weight regained, if you were active, you exercised while you took the drug, you still regain weight, but your net actually zero. You're back to sort of where you started, whereas the people who didn't have exercise regained more weight, which is the more typical weight regain pattern. So again, chalk another one up for exercise. It's not the driver of the weight loss, but it certainly affects A, the composition of what you lose, and then B, your ability to be able to resist weight regain. I think the future of these drugs after people have lost the weight is to dial the dose back, to, still keeping, I'll say, keeping the lid on appetite a little bit, but at the same time, thinking about ways to rev your metabolism up. What better than exercise to do that? And a little bit more protein, thermogenic effect, preserve the lean body mass. I know I'm probably preaching to the converted again.
No, but I mean, it's like it is great. It's just like, even for a person with type 2 diabetes, like take the pharmaceutical and it's not a like one or the other, it's a stacking effect. And the end result is perhaps that you don't need, as much pharmaceutical intervention because you're stacking these things. So no, thank you for your insights on that, because we really appreciate it. And we've just been watching whatever research is available, but we obviously know that more and more, especially as the use is picked up, not just for its original intention, but as the use is picked up, I suspect we'll see more and more come out.
That surprised us. And I'll say this because we've got 2 clinical trials on the go with older people right now that we're targeting people who are overweight.
Yep.
And we're struggling because a lot of people are coming in and saying, "Oh, I'm on Ozempic, I'm on Wegovy, I'm on Saxenda,"
Yes.
And all of a sudden I'm like, "So did you have diabetes?" And they're like, "Oh no, I'm just..." So it surprised us, or surprised me, in fact. And the students are like, "Well, why are we struggling again?" I said, "Because a lot of people don't feel like they have to come in and do the exercise anymore, when it's actually, I think, that's probably more important now, that you do it." But it's an interesting time to be around and see this. I think like everything else, if obesity is, and I'm definitely of this belief that it's a chronic disease that requires treatment. We do it for heart disease. We do it for, you name the chronic disease. Exercise is an adjunctive treatment, as you say, that the stack that's part of what you should be doing. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't even thought of that in terms of recruitment, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm involved in it.
It's on my mind.
Yeah.
Right now, we have these lab meetings, and we're like, why are we struggling to get these people? And then 2 grad students go, "Oh well, 6 or 7 people a week say we're on Ozempic,"
Yeah.
and these are people in their 60s, and so these folks are already on the downslope of sarcopenia, like, no question.
Yeah.
And they're losing weight. That's great, and they're normalizing all kinds of metabolic issues they have. But I'm like, what about their muscle? And so, come back to me when you're 70. Let's see how you're doing.
Yeah. Like you said, it's a very exciting time because these drugs are going to be great for certain things, but every single case there is nuance. As you said, it comes back to that nuance, right? So it's when they're kind of just like, "Oh, you want this? Take it. You want to lose weight? Take it." It's like there has to be a little more conversation had than that, I think. But we'll get there. It's going to be an evolution.
Yes. Yeah. Just to switch gears a little bit, speaking of medication, though, we noticed over the last couple of years you've gotten involved in some research around the menstrual cycle, or systematic reviews around the menstrual cycle, which has been a hot topic for a while. And, unfortunately, we always find whenever something becomes a hot topic, people jump in and offer products. And there has been no shortage of products around, like train as a female, you must train this way because this one research paper showed that we might metabolize these substrates at this particular point in time. So like there's so much targeted stuff. and what we found was interesting from what we read of your papers was essentially what we try to tell people is that it should be individualized, because there's currently no evidence to suggest that, in like a eumenoric cycle with ovulation, this always happens, or with the oral contraceptive, this always happens, even though, they also have differences. So as much as there is a gap in terms of our understanding of how it can really influence like athletic performance and hypertrophy and so on, gap in the sense that maybe we don't have a ton of like really robust evidence, but we have enough to say that you don't need this hyper specialized plan that's actually not even specialized towards you at all. It's more just like a generalized approach of, if you're a female that menstruates, you must do this at this point in your cycle. So what surprised you about your reviews? Like what surprised you and your team about what you were reading and what you concluded?
So hand on heart, I'll tell you why we got into this, is that we, our group here, and probably science in general, have done a generally crap job researching women. So, hand on heart, that's got to change. So we got into this, and we wanted to do some resistance training studies in women. And we spoke to a few people. They said, "Oh well, what about the menstrual cycle?" And my take was, well, women train throughout their menstrual cycle. Maybe glibly said, no lived experience, right? So this is what women do, right? And they said, "Oh well, there's these menstrual cycle periodized training programs." I was like, "What?" So this is how it starts. So I had some amazing PhD students. One, Lauren Colenso-Semple, just defended her PhD thesis. Stay tuned for some amazing data coming out from hers. And Alicia D'Souza, who's currently a PhD student. And we started digging into this and said, well, let's look and see what the evidence is. And as you say, there's some kind of crummy evidence, but there's not no evidence. And I think you've hit the nail right on the head when you say that it's subtle, nuanced changes that really, for some women, could have a potential effect, and for other women, in fact, most women, don't have any effect. So the net result is that there's no net benefit or detriment, or however you want to put it, to training in one particular phase or doing one thing in one part of your menstrual cycle versus another. It's still coaching 101. So understanding that some women have, symptoms that would sideline them on certain days, that's just not a good day to train. And just like, if you had a male client come in that said, what, I didn't sleep last night. I've been having a real rough go at work. And it's like, okay, well, our plan was to, crush you today. And you're like, well, we're not going to do that because we're smart and we know how to handle people who are experiencing other life stresses. So I think, and again, I don't mean to come across as trite, but everything that I've seen, and particularly when you talk to people at the elite levels of sport, there are some athletes who are very affected by their menstrual cycle. There are some athletes that choose to use oral contraceptives so that they don't have to deal with their menstrual cycle, and then who don't like being on oral contraceptives, so they stop. There are other women who, for years, and while they're competing, they skip the placebo phase of an oral contraceptive, so they don't have a menstrual period. And it's all over the place with respect to practice. So it's hard to look at that body of literature and talk about prescription of training, according to your follicular and or luteal phase or something like that. So again, I try to be humble in this because I'm male. And again, so but I'm letting some really bright young PhD students lead the way in this. And every piece of data that comes up indicates that there's literally nothing that are in terms of patterning around the menstrual cycle that makes me think that it's advantageous to do one thing or not. But stay tuned. We've got some good research in hand. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. Um, but let's just say I'm not changing my mind
Great.
That's great.
Yeah.
No, thank you for that.
And that's
without giving too much away.
yeah. There was a lot of common sense in what you just said there, Stu. I don't know if the internet's gonna like that much, but yeah, I think like you said, it comes down to coaching 101 and treating every individual as an individual and asking them what is their lived experience, what is what has the past week been like, what is today like, letting them do what they need to do within their parameters of comfort and ability, right? It's regardless of sex, gender, whatever, it's an individualized thing, and allowing everyone to live their own journey. That's, I think, what's most important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have cancer patients down in our center, um, and I'd be the first person to say is that we want everybody to come in and have a vigorous workout every day. But if you're going through your third round of chemo or you've had radiation, and you come in and the best you can do is we do a couple laps of the gym, and we're going to sit down, we're going to talk, we're going to, how you feeling, how's it going, and another person and that may be the best tonic, as opposed to the workout we have planned for you. And it's the same here, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that has happened over the years is just more coaches are even comfortable asking, their clients, and more clients are willing to even offer up that information. As I think, especially when I was a younger athlete, none of us really spoke about that. And that's problematic, right? Because then, if one person is having a really hard time, that can't be addressed for them. So really, I think the fact that people are more open to asking about it and talking about it and understanding that some people are more affected than others, like that to me is the biggest thing. I'm like, it doesn't, it doesn't get much simpler than that, but it's also incredibly important. So you can actually respond to what the person needs in the moment and understand, that it can operate as a stressor, much as you gave the analogy of the sleep. Is lack of sleep is also the same sort of thing, same sort of stressor. And with that said, like one of the questions that we had for you was just around knowledge, transmission or dissemination and the changes that you've seen with that, because you're very active on like LinkedIn and certain social media platforms, collaborating. We saw you have a webinar tonight. This will unfortunately be published a bit later, so nobody listening will actually be able to sign on or tune in, like with CSEP.
Yeah. I will have had a webinar.
You will have had a webinar, May,
check it out,
whatever day today is, 7th. But so we see you're out there a lot, and what have you noticed about what you've had to do as a researcher and what your lab has had to do in order to change the way in which knowledge is transmitted to general pop or to coaches, trainers, people working with gen pop and athletes alike?
Yeah, I'm going to come back first to your removal of the taboo about talking about your period, menstrual cycle, and that's awesome. I mean, I think that that's a huge win for female in general, but female athletes in particular. So, two thumbs up there for sure. With respect to the communication stuff, and people think I'm making this up, but so in Canada, every university is a public institution. So I'm a civil servant for all intents and purposes. I do think it's part of my job to not just spend taxpayers' money, government grants, and everything that I get to try and communicate to the public. I think that that's a duty. I know it's not a sentiment shared by everybody, and some of my colleagues ask why I do what I do. What a pain. I enjoy most of it. Social media, as you know, can sometimes be a little bit trying, but I do try and communicate messages as effectively as I can. I've learned a lot from other people actually about styles of communication and about the level at which I try and talk about things to try and simplify concepts. But I enjoy it. It's a form of teaching, which I also enjoy. The difference is the audience isn't the captive, call it the caged learner that I get when they come to class, but people that are out there, and so I think that's important. I mean, I think that it's important to try and get good information out, and there's some awesome examples of people who do it way better than me and spend a lot of time doing it and honing their craft and writing and some of the stuff that I see on certain platforms. I'm just amazed. Well, first I'm like, how did you do that? Very creative ways of communicating. And, but yeah, thanks for the acknowledgement. I do try. Um, I'm even on TikTok, but I got on there more to annoy my youngest son.
Yeah. You got on there to dance, is what you meant.
I got on there because he told me, he said that old people ruin TikTok. And I was like, dude, are you saying I'm old? And he said, well, I'm just saying.
Of course.
So I said, well, let the ruining commence. I am now on TikTok, killing your social media platform.
Killing your algorithm.
Yeah, that's right. There's your dad.
I appreciate that more than anything.
That's so good. Oh, that's funny. We're not on TikTok, but I just don't.
Well, TikTok, even if you're not on it, is the absolute cesspool of
correct
misinformation.
Yeah.
So
we
and at the same time, you can find people, and I'm like, that's awesome. Like, or other stuff that I'm like, the creativity that went into that. But that's sort of, I find that's about 1 in every 10 things that I look at.
You can always find some signal in the noise. We got that from you.
It's finding the signal. Yes.
Yeah. We work with some younger. We work with a huge age range, really. But
you can say it. Like, I'm an old guy. It's all good. I get it.
We work with the youngs and the olds.
The youngs
exactly.
And the olds. We are the in-betweens. So we work with some younger athletes, and they tend to be on TikTok, and so they'll often bring stuff to us and say, hey, is this true? And one of the rules of thumb that we've given them to empower them with even being able to filter whether it's true is, if the person's the same age as you and they're talking about these amazing supplements or whatever else, no, not true. Because if they are 14 and they have that level of education,
industry leader,
they would not be on TikTok.
That's not a bad rule of thumb, actually. I think there's a lot of truth in that. Yeah, as you said, the signal in the noise, right? There are some true luminaries who are out there that I respect their craft, and I respect their content. There are far fewer of them than people would think.
Yeah.
Correct.
We can confirm that.
I think that might be a great place to stop for the day.
Probably, yeah. And everybody's going, well, how do you know that you're not one? I was like, exactly. I post so infrequently, and I try and save a true, as my son say, knowledge bomb for when it's warranted. So
yeah. It's like one person that we know, a practitioner in the States, he said he doesn't share unless it's meaningful. And I think that that's great, because it immediately cuts down on the potential noise a single individual and professional could make, because you only share when it's meaningful versus when the algorithm tells you it's 9 a.m. on a Saturday and you should post now because a lot of people are online.
Once again, people said, well, we're going to drop this at this time because that's when people are on. I'm like, how do you know that? Aren't people on it all the time? They're like, oh, no. I was like, who knew there were these times?
Magical, and they change all the time.
If I look around when I'm outside walking around, most people are on all the time. So
I work on a university campus, and it seems like pretty much students have that thing soldered to their hand, and they're always looking at it. And so I'm like, how are people ever off?
Yeah. Speaking of which, though, Stu, where can people find you?
I am Mac Kinprof, MacKinprof, Master Kinesiology Professor, highly original, on Twitter, X, and Instagram, and even on TikTok.
Yeah.
And you can find me, Stuart Phillips, PhD, on LinkedIn and Facebook. So.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and hear, what your lab's up to, what you're up to, and we really appreciate the time that you've given to us and to other podcasters just to try to share a little bit of the information directly.
I appreciate it. Appreciate you guys giving me the floor and the forum to do so. I will say is that you guys are on my Instagram feed, and I'm impressed as heck is what you guys can do physically. So I'd aspire to that, but I know my body doesn't bend in those laser shapes. So
Mine didn't used to either, Stu.
yeah, I know. So yeah, I did a stretching program during COVID because I just wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And it does get better. Now I've stopped it and I can't do that anymore.
Wow, what a concept, right?
It's weird.
I know.
Practice something
Crazy.
I know. Like, use it or lose it. Who
I don't
said
know.
that?
First
know.
time I've heard that.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you again for joining us. Everyone, you can find us as always at movewelldaily.com and move_daily_EDS on Instagram. And please head over to iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can find us there and subscribe, like, share. So again, Stu, thank you so much for joining us today, and we will catch everyone on Move Daily Health Podcast next time. We hope you enjoyed our conversation. To hear more, head on over to Stitcher or iTunes and subscribe to the Move Daily Health Podcast. And don't hesitate to leave us a review. Thanks for listening.